Hey everybody, welcome to the Throwback Thursday GMG review. Now this is a follow-up to my review of Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader, which was, you can see it one up in the playlist there, which was the first in a long time I've done a throwback basically review of a book that's been out of production for years and years. Now the reason for this one is, this book is a really good example of the culmination of an edition of the game, especially a first edition of a game, where so much material has been written and the game has evolved so much from its original and intended, state, that they needed to kind of culminate it with a, you don't need to cart around 800 issues of our magazine and 100 publications to summarize all this stuff. We're going to put it into one book. And make it basically more playable. So the idea being that you could carry this guy right here with the battle manual, have all the core rules for the game in one place, and it would update the game from what is this right here, effectively an RPG, into more of a war game, looking like you see here on the cover, where you've got multiple characters leading squads, a mixture of vehicles and stuff on the table. And then eventually this was followed hotly on the heels by second edition Warhammer 40,000, that streamlined the game from a quasi-RPG into a mass combat system. Well, mass combat, we're talking like 15, 20 models that it grew out of into the editions that we play today. So this is a kind of really important book. It's passed over quite a bit because really what it's doing is it's taking these books, which are the compendium, chapter approved, the companion, that had, just basically just reprinted White Dwarf articles. Tons of White Dwarf articles over and over again. In fact, so many White Dwarf articles, I shoved White Dwarf articles I printed off into these books, right? So Dreadnought rules shoved into the rules for Dreadnoughts to like just as placeholders, literally overall. And basically put them all in place. Now there was another one of these called the vehicle manual, but the vehicle manual isn't really as interesting because it was even more complicated rules for vehicles than were in the Rogue Trader rulebook. And they almost totally got scrapped for second edition. So while it's kind of an interesting historical footnote, they're not really better rules even than what's in Warhammer 40,000, and it is the baby thrown out with the bathwater when Warhammer 40,000 gets rewritten for second edition. Now, what's in here? There's an intro here. It's about 96 pages, including actually catalog sheets and tokens and templates, which we'll actually recognize from later editions of the game as being almost identical, that basically put all in one place all the information you need to play the game. Now, I'm going to be careful with this book because, as you can see, it's heavily taped and it's my original. It's never been reprinted, and you can see the spine starting to go on it, so I don't want to be too rough while I do this this review. So what's in here? Well, the introduction basically is that from the time of publication of this book forward, and this was in '92, it's been 5 years since the game has been printed. Now, there's a bunch of registries on here. White Dwarf and Warhammer are registered trademarks of Games Workshop Limited because the company's incorporated. This is post '91 when the company basically had a management buyout and the game became a corporation, or the company became a corporation. Games Workshop Citadel and the Citadel Castle and Space Marine are trademarks of Games Workshop Limited. The Scatter Dice are UK registered designs number 2017484. So the Scatter Dice gets first introduced in here, not the artillery dice, just the Scatter Dice. As a thing that's actually trademarked by Games Workshop. So the section headers here are kind of important. Shooting, new rules for shooting in the shooting phase. Line of sight and cover, to hit modifiers changing, damage changing, saving throws, blast area weapons, grenades, rules for Overwatch, which kind of replaced the stand and fire rules, sustained fire, and then how to choose a target optional rules. The biggest change, though, here is the hand-to-hand combat rules, and those who've played second edition are going to recognize the prototype for that hand-to-hand combat system that was actually, it lasted from the 1.5 end of the Rogue Trader edition through until second edition, and then disappeared forever. Basically, from second edition, and then third edition, you've got a close combat system in third edition that basically goes through until now. So once initiative gets dropped, it changes slightly, but we're talking about basically 1 and maybe a quarter editions where this very esoteric combat system happens, and it's closer, I guess, to the new Kill Team version of the rules. And it gets used in Necromunda. But other than that, it appears for a little while and then is never seen again. And then finally, a compilation of the stats for pretty much every weapon released through the various releases in Rogue Trader. A lot of this stuff isn't featured in the core rulebook, and some stuff that's in the core rulebook just isn't in here, like defense lasers and macro lasers and stuff. But things like Tyranid Bone Swords, the Banshee Mask, Manda Blasters, Shuriken Pistols, because there was only a Shuriken Catapult at the time, through weirder stuff like the Death Spitter, which arrives, the Ogren Ripper gun, and other various things like the Assault Cannon that came out in Space Hulk that just weren't a part of the core rules back then, and as releases happened, were added to the game. Support weapons and grenades, force weapons, the catalog pages, and then of course the card section here at the end. So what's different in this edition? And because we're doing a game today, Bad Day at Hell's Reach Part 2, that you can see in the Rogue Trader playlist, this is going to be something that we're using. So it's kind of just like a complete rewrite. So there's some things that are kind of taken for granted, things like line of sight. You still have a 90-degree line of fire from where you're looking. Low obstacles and cover get a little more clearly defined with some pictures and stuff. Models obstructing other models. And the modifiers are roughly the same, as well as the weapon profile itself. So short and long range are still a thing in maximum range. Your target to hit is still the same. It's your chance out of 6. And then your modifiers are pretty much the same. So shooting from a fast-moving vehicle, shooting at a rapidly moving target, if the target's behind soft cover, hard cover, or a very rapidly moving target. Then weapon modifiers. So if you have a gun modifier, like a plasma pistol is +2 to hit if it's inside its short range, or -1 at long. Those are pretty much the same as regular Rogue Trader. And then 7 pluses to hit. If you need a 7+, you roll a 6 followed by a progressive number. So a 7+ to hit would be a 4+, or 6 followed by a 4+. An 8+ would be a 5 followed by a 6+ followed by a 5+. And then a 9+ to hit would be a 6 followed by a 6. So a 1 in 36 chance of landing that hit. If you need a 10+ to hit, you just can't hit. The strength and toughness chart is pretty much the same. Saving throw modifier is pretty much the same. You can see here, power armor, however, is still a 4+ armor save. So even though we're late in the edition here for Rogue Trader, it's still a 4+. And then your save modifiers. Now, blast weapons do change quite a bit, and this is much closer to when you are using the 2nd edition rules. So now, in the previous version, if you remember my Rogue Trader one, you would place the blast template, then depending on how big the template was, you'd roll a die. So the bigger the template, the more likely it would scatter. And it would scatter using a D12 for like a clock system, a number of inches equal to the roll of a D6. Now, and then you would roll to hit individually the models underneath. Now, you would place, actually it's kind of like a War Machine stream template in that way. Now you place the template, you roll to hit, and if it misses the ballistic skill of the target firing, then you would roll to scatter. You roll the scatter dice for the direction, and then it's equal to a D6 if you roll an arrow, but if you roll the hit with an arrow, it's 2D6 in distance, and then just whatever's underneath is hit. Partially hit models are hit on a 4+. If you roll, however, a hit followed by a double on the roll, you could have a misfire, and weapons could kerboom, land on top of you, or go out of control and scatter even more. So there's an interesting sort of like more randomized, and I like these blast rules, although I do actually quite like the rules for blast in the Rogue Trader rulebook too. They're just, the operation order is different, right? In one you scatter first, then roll to hit. In this one you'd roll to hit and then roll to scatter. Although these are fairly familiar for editions of Fantasy for years. Grenades, based on your strength, how far you can throw them, they use the same as scatter otherwise. And then shooting in close combat. Normally you can't do it, but you could roll and shoot into combat in this edition. If you do so, however, there's a chance, a 50-50 chance you hit either model. So 1 to 3 hit one, 4 to 6 hit the other. And then Overwatch, if you do nothing else during a turn, you can shoot during your opponent turn during the movement phase. You can also fire an Overwatch when you get charged. So this kind of replaces the standard fire rules with these Overwatch rules instead. And then sustained fire is effectively the same as the following fire rules, with the following exception. When you do another shot, you get +1 to hit for each additional shot at the same target, and then -1 to hit if you change targets afterwards. Then finally, any hit rolls of 1 during the second or subsequent shot means you jam, and you have to clear your jam by repairing it on a 4, 5, or 6. So sustained fire becomes a little bit more risky because a lot of weapons are only missing on a 1 anyway, so they will jam when they stop firing. You basically fire them until you either decide to stop shooting because the target's dead, or you jammed, which is very, very common. And then some weapons are move or fire, which means that you move them or shoot them, and there's not just a movement penalty for like inches based on how heavy it is. Choosing a target. Now these are optional. Typically in Rogue Trader, if you could see it, you could shoot it. So you could pick up personnel in a squad, you could shoot a heavy weapon, you could shoot a sergeant no matter what. You can shoot any squad that you could see. The optional rule is you have to shoot the closest thing you can see unless the thing is either something you can't hurt or something easier to shoot. So you could ignore models that were in cover for models in the open. You could ignore vehicles for troops, for instance. But it did make for a more interesting game because maneuvering actually mattered, and it meant you could structure your squad in such a way that your riflemen were at the front, your heavy weapon was at the back, and they couldn't just pick out your sergeants and heavy weapons. In 2nd edition, it led very often to like a V formation, where your heavy weapon would be sitting at the back with its 9-degree fire arc out, and the rest of the squad would kind of be sitting forward of that position so that they could basically protect the heavy weapon from dying until last. Some beautiful art. Oh, look at those orcs. Look at how cool they are. And a big warlord titan all knocked over. And then hand-to-hand combat. Okay, so the big difference in hand-to-hand compared to in the earlier editions is that the normal sort of like Warhammer style of rolling to hit, so rolling based on like your initiative, whoever's got a higher initiative would go first, comparing weapon skills, rolling off, and then just doing the dice that do hit, just like today, that many strength hits to your target. In hand-to-hand combat, now you're rolling an attack dice pool. You're adding the highest die that you roll to your weapon skill. Your opponent's doing the same thing, and it's a simultaneous combat. Then you get to add any modifiers. So modifiers would be things like charging, outnumbering your opponent, or being a subsequent fighter, or other things like if your opponent fumbles, any ones they roll in the pool get added to your score. Then you compare your total scores, which is actually similar to Bushido, which is an indie game that's kind of taken from that same sort of like model. And the differential is the person's number of strikes that they do to the opponent. This is very similar to 2nd edition 40k and 1st edition Necromunda. It also introduced the parry rule. If you had any form of sword, you could reroll the highest die. And then for your combats and stuff like that, if you had a multiple combat, so you're fighting more than one person, you'd fight them all in order, but the second and subsequent one would get +1 of their weapon skill and +1 attack dice as you start to exhaust yourself fighting around the corner. So 5 Gene Stealers charging. The first one would be to fight a Space Marine. Like let's say a Space Marine captain gets charged by 5 Gene Stealers. The first one he fights, they're both weapon skill 7, they both have the same attack dice pool. The last one he's fighting is weapon skill 11 and has like 7 attack dice that it's fighting with. So they get more dangerous the more you're following. Then if you kill your target, you can move up 2 inches to get into a new combat and stuff. And keep on fighting. Rules for breaking off, rules for vehicles and dreadnoughts, and some examples. With a beautiful illustration by John Blanche of Ragnar Blackmane. How cool is that? The Emperor versus Horus, iconic. And then we're into weapon profiles, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time here because they're pretty much what you'd expect. You get an illustration, some background, some special rules for all of these. But it was nice to have them all in one place, and it meant that the battle manual saved you a ton of time after you wrote your army lists, looking stuff up, especially when it came to... I love these illustrations. And actually, this is almost identical when you get to it to the... look at that Tyranid attack picture. To the War Gear book in 2nd edition, where you have these same illustrations, almost, same descriptions, and then a lot of the same artwork and stuff being used as well. The Thud Gun, which is a template in here for how it lands, basically like a creeping fire, or custom weapons from Here We Go and Freebooters. Grenades, there's a million types of grenades, including vortex grenades. All your force weapons that the psionics can use, and then some beautiful catalog shots of stuff that was using heavy weapons. So all of the heavy weapon platforms for the Eldar, all the heavy weapon troopers from the Chaos Marines, where they had empty hands and then you just mix and match the heavy weapon you like, which is really cool. The Space Marine Strike Force, the 3 metal Strike Force model Marines with plastic arms. And this is a fantastic, if you can ever get your hand on this box, this is to me, like one of the preeminent 2nd edition things, because it's where the Mark 7 Marine armor becomes like a thing. And it's just dudes with bolters. You get 15 Space Marines with bolters in this box, and you can mix and match them with all the heavy weapons and sergeants at the time. The old Terminator box, I got one of these in the goop right now. Dan Cuccia gave me one. He had one that he randomly found. And I've got one painted right now for Space Hulk, but I'll paint another one for my Flesh Terrors. And then plastics, just arms and weapons. And then you got a combat reference sheet, and you can see these were all designed in '92 to be cut out. Weapon sheets, all your stat lines for your guns. A beautiful illustration of some squats fighting against some Chaos Marines. Look at how cool that is. And then these actually were designed to pop out and then get cut out. They're actually, it's a cardboard section inside the book. These are actually heavy card. All your templates, jammed counters, Overwatch counters, and then the Thud Gun template as well. And these were almost identical to my second edition one, so when we play, we'll just use the second edition templates. And there you go, the Battle Manual, a really important book and key to the game we're playing today, Bad Day at Hell's Reach Part 2, which you can see in the Rogue Trader section of like the TBT 40K. So that section is going to fill up with Rogue Trader games, second edition games and stuff, but we wanted to do a game sort of like bridging both sides of Rogue Trader, and this is sort of a classic example of where it moves from being, there's even a section here, sorry, in the shooting phase, I didn't even mention about fast dice, rolling groups of dice for squads shooting the same weapon, and applying the hits back to front. Important key changes for changing Rogue Trader from a quasi-RPG to much more of a war game, as these books kind of progressively added army lists, squad formations, and ended up, it's funny, my yellow book, the companion, I don't have because it's actually spiral bound and a 3-hole punch. So it's still in storage because it doesn't read as well, and it doesn't actually look like a book. Yeah, a really important book for sort of like the evolution of the game from its original sort of form into sort of more like what we think of as Warhammer 40K today. And you can see that game today is the Flesh Terrors Assault, the Orc Stronghold on Hell's Reach. Plans after this, we're going to jump into second edition, and that should be the next TBT review you see when Chris and I get to that. And we modify sort of our model collections to be more sort of like this. I'm going to paint some Strike Force Marines and some Starter Set Marines, and I'll go through the 3 manuals from second edition and show off sort of like the key changes. But what's cool is if you watch these in order, you'll be able to see kind of the game grow from almost identical to Warhammer Fantasy Battle through to kind of its own unique system, which kind of comes to the front in second edition. So anyway, big thanks for watching. We'll see you for more TBT reviews in the future. Tony Mash. Hey there, I hope you enjoyed that video. There are tons of other games already recorded for you to watch. Click over to my channel page if you haven't already, and have a look through the dozens of playlists full of videos. I guarantee you'll discover a game you haven't seen played before. I put out new videos 7 days a week, and every day is themed to a different genre as I continue to explore the wider world of gaming. Of course, none of that's possible without you, the viewer, so click a like and subscribe if you'd like to stay on top of what's happening here daily. My 2 kids and I are massively grateful to be able to have the flexibility of this job so I can always maximize my time with them. If you want to support me continuing to put out this content, it's only possible because of my amazing backers on Patreon who support the studio, equipment, and model cost, as well as being how I make the bulk of my living. You can also help out by buying a t-shirt through Spreadshirt, a measuring gauge or widget from Death Ray Designs, or buying one of my games and supplements like Last Days, Gamma Wolves, and Blaster. As a way of showing my appreciation, patrons get early access to new games and supplements that I write throughout the course of the year. Huge thanks for watching, it really does help out, and happy gaming.